آزادی بیان،
言论自由
free speech.
So Nazila, our seventh principle is we respect the believer but not necessarily the content of the belief. Would you agree with that?
Yes, but I think human rights law does expand on that further. I mean, we could read this and say we respect the believer, but they should jolly well keep out of the public sphere. Whereas human rights standards go further than that, and they say, for example, in relation to freedom of religion or belief, it's the right to have, but also to manifest. It's alone and in public. And it should be without coercion. So manifestation in public, in worship, practice, observance, or teaching can be limited, but on very particular grounds, and those should be proportionate and necessary. And they are not subject to derogation. And they're not subject to derogation, even in times of public emergency. Then further, it's supplemented by minority rights standards, where there are positive duties by a state, that where there is a cohesive minority group that wants to maintain its characteristics, amongst them religious or cultural or linguistic, that that community, that there's a positive duty by the state to allow for the development and progress of that community. So I think I do agree with it, but I think we shouldn't be too narrow in respecting the believer as long as he's alone and in private, not in the political sphere, not in the public sphere.
Right. So two things on that. First of all, it's a point about the individual as opposed to the community of practice.
Well, it can be an interpretation. It could be very individual interpretation of religion and how that religion should be manifested in public, or that individual feels. I mean, this includes climate change, this includes religions, but it also includes beliefs and atheism. So it's also the expression of that identity, whether it's religion or belief, in the public sphere.
Now, in the big discussion over a number of years in the UN bodies on an offence of defamation of religions, this distinction precisely was blurred. Could you say something about how that discussion developed?
It was blurred on many levels, and it was even what was being protected was religion itself. It wasn't even pointing out that it is the persons belonging to minorities or the persons holding religion or belief that have a role and should be protected in the human rights sphere. It was to protect religion, and I mean that's became hugely problematic and seemed tangential to how we had previously understood human rights.
Just tell us very quickly how that became such a prominent debate, and perhaps you could also chip in how it became such a prominent debate. Who put it onto the agenda so forcefully?
This dates back to 1999, so it's a pre-9/11 issue. It was put forward by the Organization of Islamic Conference, but it had, over the years, so over the 12 years that it was adopted at formerly the UN Commission, Human Rights Commission, subsequently, changed in 2007 to the Human Rights Council. It was supported, obviously, by other states as well. I mean, the voting record is out there. But yeah, I mean, I think many states didn't think through the implications of this. So if you are protecting from a religion from defamation, and you're not sharply defining what you're protecting, why you're protecting it, who are the communities or individuals that are being protected as a result of this resolution, and what are the consequences. It took many years for Western states to realize, first of all, that this may infringe very severely freedom of expression, opinion and expression. But what we should also have, we gradually realized towards the end that this also, first and foremost, it has the word religion there, but it doesn't protect freedom of religion or belief in any way, shape or form as captured in international human rights standards. So if you have the right to adopt, maintain and change religion or belief, which includes the right to reconsider your religion, be indifferent, or change it, then fixing it in this way infringes freedom of religion or belief. It may infringe freedom of opinion and expression. It sure does infringe minority rights. And even penalties that were being considered under the defamation resolution were not pointed out. So as one special rapporteur said a number of years ago, are we talking about the automatic resort to the death penalty? I mean, that might seem a bit fantastical, but nevertheless, I mean, if you're going to have a protection for defaming religion, we should know, exactly what we're talking about and what penalties we're considering. Is it automatically in the criminal sphere, or what about due process for those that have been accused of defamation of religion? I mean, these have very real implications.
Agnes, you were much involved in that debate. Actually, there is no such offence. Those who proposed it have now retreated, and the latest general comment of the Human Rights Committee on Article 19 is rather clear on this point. Can you say just a little about how that came about?
Yeah, I think the debate over defamation of religion needs to be really contextualized. I don't think we would have had such a debate with all the acrimony and the divisions and the tension that it created 15 years ago. It was a complete product of 9/11, the war on terror, and the civilization conflict kind of thesis that played itself out in Geneva at the Human Rights Council. As Naz pointed out, for about 2-3 years, the defamation on religion resolution was passed. In fact, I think the first 2 years unanimously.
So 99, 2000.
Yeah, I can't quite remember the date, but there was certainly a period where no one really reacted to it, and it did not create the kind of tension that we saw afterwards, after 2001, when the debate over defamation of religion came to embody everything that was wrong with that decade, basically. And what you saw within Geneva, within the Human Rights Commission and then Council, was the conflict between Western-minded government, whatever that means, versus the Islamic Conference, a large number of African states, many Latin American states, and many Asian states, including Asian states that are notoriously against religion, such as China. So the defamation of religion, because governments found themselves unable to reach any kind of meaningful dialogue over it, became an extremely conflict-ridden issue. And it took some 10 years or so for it to be, I will say, not addressed. Actually, what has happened is that it has been moved aside. I don't think that there has been any victory over conceptually or normatively over that concept from either side. As we were progressing in the years, those holding pushing for the concept of defamation of religion started losing some of their voices, so the trend was towards at least an equal kind of battlefield, in quotation mark. But I don't think that normatively the issue has been addressed at all. What has been addressed is a decision to move it aside and to say, let's move on and let's find some other issues where we can find consensus.
But is it too optimistic to read that general comment of the Human Rights Committee, which represents with representatives of a great diversity of states, as some kind of a limited normative convergence after a decade of the clash of civilizations?
We like to think that the general comments will have that impact. However, when the debates over defamation of religion was taking place, there were already quite a lot of normative norms, internationally, regionally, domestically, that pushed or that reinforce the idea that religion cannot be protected in law as a human being. It's a completely different set of things, and that under international human rights law, there is no specific protection attributed to religion, because that opened the door to all kinds of violations and abuses. So I think it was firmly, positioned in laws, or at least in many laws, that there were that the concept didn't really was not a progressive concept from a human rights standpoint. So the general comment adds on to that, but it doesn't create the norm around defamation of religion. I think what is important, I think the tensions will be there. It will be played out in our countries as it will be played out regionally or still internationally. Every time somebody is going to say something on a religion, someone else from a different normative community will react to it, thanks to the fact that the media is spreading those messages across communities. What has happened in Geneva, I think, is a political resolution. It is not a legal, it is not a conceptual, and it's certainly not a normative resolution. The United States, I think, and a few other governments, including the European Union to a lesser extent, have managed, through their diplomatic skills and might, to move the debate to a different sphere, and with Pakistan and with Egypt reached some kind of understanding that really that was not a really good debate to have at that moment, and that we needed to find some consensual language. And that consensual language was found around the protection of religious minorities, the protection of religious believers, but not around the regressive standard on defamation of religion.
So it was the West after all?
No. The West on its own will never have reached that consensus. The United States needed Egypt and Pakistan at a minimum to bring about the European Union on one hand, the rest of the Muslim Islamic governments on the other, to really get to a consensus.
So just very briefly.
And that's my interpretation.
So very briefly, and I'll just ask Nazila briefly, so why were Egypt and Pakistan so interested in reaching such an agreement?
That's what I mean. It's not conceptual, it's political. What happened in 2010, 2011 was, the United States, Egypt and Pakistan having discussions way beyond defamation of religions. As you know, there was the war in Afghanistan. I mean, there were many other dynamics which I think contributed to create some kind of community of positions. And defamation of religion was far too much a source of huge tensions to be allowed to continue in that setting, in my opinion.
Do you think that's right?
Well, I wanted to say that there was a momentum that's encouraged support for the resolution. And what we should have been discussing is discrimination on the basis of race, discrimination on the basis of religion, stop and search, stereotyping, migrant workers' rights, coercion on the basis of religion, and these are real human rights issues that we should have been grappling with. And the defamation agenda fuzzied that, moved it into problematic areas, and I agree with Agnes that operationalizing it was just impossible. The fact that it built on popular sentiment and true human rights concerns on all these, these discrimination agendas were the real instigators or catalysts for its continue for so long. So, we are facing these issues. Hopefully now we will do so within the framework of the Convention for the Elimination of Racial Discrimination in the Human Rights Committee.
Article 20.
Have article incitement, and let's have sensible debates grounded in human rights on real issues that became very vague in this resolution.
There was real human rights concerns behind the resolution. I mean, the governments pushing for defamation of religions were not just trying to flag some old concept around religion being held supra over every human being. I believe that there were some real human rights concerns, particularly around the treatment of Muslims in Western Europe, that prompted quite a bit of the tension there, which unfortunately were not addressed through the defamation of religion resolution. And I think everyone eventually realized that it was getting us nowhere.
Because the real problem was the maltreatment of the religious, or
Yeah.
discrimination against the religious, rather than this vague defamation of religion.
And I think there's also a very fundamental difference in ideas and in attitudes that this debate epitomized. So I remember just sitting at a meeting with a representative from one of the Muslim countries who was personally begging me to understand why he wanted so much for defamation of religion to be criminalized. He said, "Why can't you just respect our religion? Why can't you just respect us?" And I noticed as he talked, you know, he conflated respect my religion and respect me. And of course I tried to say, well, you see, in my country and in my way of thinking, it should be possible to criticize a religion because a religion is a set of beliefs which is not so different from an idea. And for us, it's very important to be able to criticize an idea. But, you know, we were just talking right past one another because of our very different perspectives. And I think on a very sort of simple human level, that's also a bit what was going on.
And so it seems to me, in a way, there's a quid pro quo. If people are to be asked to accept that essential distinction between respecting the believer and being free to question the belief, then it's all the more important that respect for the believer is not just preached, but practiced. That's
Well,
the way
and
the
this gentleman with whom I was trying to have a conversation, you know, I think didn't believe that it was, well, I don't like to put words in his mouth, but he seemed to think that if I disrespect his religion by questioning it, I am necessarily disrespecting him.
And perhaps when there is intolerance of any kind of manifestation of that religion or belief in the public sphere, or that really, I mean, I don't know what else to call it, it's not a very precise term, but when hate-mongering is winning political votes, then I think it's quite problematic to draw such a sharp distinction between respect of the believer and respect of the belief. So, I mean, I think it has to penetrate the public sphere and be tolerated in the public sphere in order for that respect to translate for the person holding it as being meaningful rather than coercive and silencing.
Maybe we can say that in an atmosphere of civil
civility
conversation and debate
respect.
and communication, it would be possible to say something like, why is it that you do this or that in your religious practice? That seems odd.
Sure.
Without making you feel personally attacked or disrespected.
Of course.
Yes.